Okay, for people joining this live stream, we are talking about a topic about graphics. The issue is the following. If we make, let's make an example here. So if we say table of labeled I squared, comma I goes up to 10, and then we say, whoops, oh, that's interesting. Okay, and if we say list plot of that, then we'll get those points labeled, right? However, if we say graphics of labeled, let's say point, let's make a table here, table labeled point, let's say I squared, comma I up to 5 or something, right? This is not going to work, right? This is the nub of what we're talking about. People agree?
Yes.
Oops, let's see. And I want to put this in. Does anybody know where I should put this? Do we have a is there a graphics? Oh, there's visualization. Let's put it in there.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. So this is the issue. So how could we make this work? Do we want to make this work? I think we want to make this work because I think people will assume that it works. And I don't understand why, if you're going to say, well, we're not doing anything like that, I would point out to you that if I do this, okay, and I say something like, axes goes to true, right? It is not the case that we're not having annotation in graphics, if you understand what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I think the better example of that is tooltip. Which
right.
does...
Okay, fine. So let's try this. I mean, maybe this, okay, so there we go. Right. Okay, so let's talk about what's involved in making this work. Or maybe this is just an implementation discussion. I mean, does anybody think this shouldn't work?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by work.
And
right,
what you
so
mean by
in the case of the list plot, right, it's not always putting the label in the same place. There's some automation going on.
Exactly, just like there is with the axes. Yes, there's also axes.
There is automation going on with the axes.
Yes, like for example, the fact that axis origin went through 0 was a piece of automation, right?
I think it actually went through 5, but...
Oh, really? Well, that was stupid then. Okay, so in any case, and the choice of what to put on the axes labels and so on. Okay, so let's go back to this. Well, so yes, the fact is that it requires graphics to have a post-processing pass. And I assume we have people from the front-end team here. Like, yeah, we have John here, right?
We have John and Yutsu.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm assuming that this would actually have to happen in the front end rather than, that this graphics would be passed symbolically as tooltip is, if I'm understanding correctly.
Great, works for me, meeting done.
Right. So I guess, right. So the tooltip typesets into a tooltip box, or does it not typeset into a tooltip box inside of graphics?
I think it's still a tooltip box.
Right.
John Fultz, do you want to comment on this?
Sorry, I was looking for some documentation related to some stuff we've done in the front end, and I wasn't. What was the question?
Okay, so it has to do with how tooltip is implemented in the front end. Is this turning into a tooltip box?
Yes. So there are a very few boxes which are supported. So the way boxes work is there are box contexts, and the 3 contexts are the 2D graphics, 3D graphics and typesetting. And most boxes will only work in their own context, and they just completely fail to do anything useful in any other context. But there are a very small number, and it's small because it's not easy to do, of boxes that work in every context. Tooltip is one, tooltip box, and tag box is another. And in fact, it isn't even in the case that button box is one, despite the fact that button is implemented in graphics. We implemented button using tag box.
So hold on. So what you're saying
Strangely
there,
enough.
but what you're saying is, if I were to do the following, if I were to say here, instead of this, I were to say text, and then I were to put a button in here. What's happening there?
I think you have the
maybe-
arguments of text backwards.
I'm not.
Yes.
Oh, that's supposed to be a coordinate. Okay, yeah. Well, so in this case, it actually changed the context by that's in a typesetting context.
Okay, fine. But
Through inset.
so in what sense through an inset? Okay, so in what sense is button supported natively?
Well, so if you wrap button around like disk or something like that.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know that worked.
Well, it works by constructing an event handler. And event handlers are internally implemented using tag boxes.
Okay, so if I say button around here, so what
Probably
can I
want
do?
something larger than a point unless you change point size.
Okay, all right, so let's say disk. Okay, so you're saying that this will have a button action.
Yes.
Or if I say there, see what happens if I say print I there. Oh, great, it just says I. I see. Because
buttons are hold all.
Yeah, fine. Okay, so we'd have to do the crazy with I equals I type thing.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, it's not obvious we shouldn't have a better construct for that. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, okay.
Oh, and keep in mind there's a Z order.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. So if I go up there, okay, fine. So that's an example of the thing working. Okay.
Yeah, but that's not implemented using button box. That is implemented using tag box, which is used to construct event handlers that mimic the functionality of a button.
Okay. So let's come back around to. I mean, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about. Okay. So constructs that we are interested in are labeled. Labeled, call out. What else? Brett?
You had mentioned highlighted.
Oh yeah, okay. And what about legended?
Yeah, probably that too. If you're doing labeled and call out.
Okay.
I mean, there might be others. I mean, there's all sorts of wrappers like framed and. I mean, like style.
Does that work? I mean, if I were to do this in this thing here, if I were to say instead of that, I were to say.
I mean, listplot doesn't support framed.
Yeah, right. So that's what I'm talking about. It's the stuff that listplot supports. Right.
Right. So those are the. I mean, listplot doesn't support highlighted either. But you had sent email.
It should.
Highlighted should work in graphics.
Maybe no, but okay. Maybe it should work. Okay, so look, we've got a list of things here. Okay, pop-up window. Does that work in graphics right now?
Yes.
Status window, status area.
I mean, basically everything except call out and labeled are in that list because they were already supported by graphics.
Okay, so the difference is that that labeled and call out actually affect the canvas, the actual graphics, graphics canvas, but these other things are all side effecty. Is that right?
Correct.
Well, except for style, which is a little bit different.
I mean, it doesn't affect the space. It doesn't affect plot range calculations, for example.
Yeah, I understand. So the big issue is to put in labeled and call out, which would affect plot range, potentially.
Mhm.
And I strongly think we should do it. So I would like to hear the issues here. I mean, we should do it, and it would have to be supported in the front end, which means that the algorithms that both in the desktop and cloud front end, that the algorithms you have for figuring out where labels go and so on would have to be ported there. Am I making sense?
Well, maybe not.
I mean, it may be that they come up with different algorithms.
No, but that's not going to work, because then the question is, in the case of list plot, do we leave it so that these things are being? I mean, list plot is generating a graphics object.
Right, and plot is inserting a plot range into it, at least when necessary. It may not in this example, but right, list plot calculates a plot range to embed in the graphics when necessary.
Okay, but so if we were to do something like this, let me try this. Here, and instead of this, I would say I factorial. Okay, so it successfully is positioning those. I mean, notice that it did some fancy footwork there to position these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and if I say interesting. Okay. So notice it's not cutting that thing off at the top, which means it probably had to, the fact that it left that extra space up above the 10, I bet if I don't have the labeled here, oops, if I have...
yeah, it leaves a little bit of extra padding when there are labels.
Okay, but is that the same here?
It looks like it might be the same.
Okay, all right, okay, fine. All right, so let's continue again. What are the issues in getting this to work in graphics? I mean, is it the case that we imagine, or we could imagine a situation in which call out and labeled evaluate in graphics? What do we think? John, do you have a comment on this?
So, much as so we have something right now that is able to allow you to specify how to attach an object to another object in a graphics, and it's something that we've actually used and shipped. But we've never shipped the thing directly, but we shipped some technology built on top of it. Some versions of Graph used it. It's called dynamic location. For reasons which were not entirely clear to me, but also not incredibly surprising, apparently the Graph folks moved away from using it. Essentially what it does is it says, I have an object and I want to be able to do things like understand what its perimeter is, or what its center is, or something like that. And then I want to place another object relative to that object's center perimeter, scaled coordinates away from it or something like that. Okay. And so that's a thing that we can do now. It has issues, but we can do now. But then there might be other requirements that you might ask, which start to get much, much more difficult. Like, for example, preventing labels from overlaying one.
Yeah, right. The label placement algorithm is not something we want to lose. I mean, we just spent a bunch of effort making the label placement algorithm work well for list plot. Mm-hmm. So the question is, we're not going to have something where the label placement is great in list plot, and as soon as you put something in graphics, it doesn't work. Yeah. So that's why I asked my question. Unfortunately, it does seem to be the case that to figure out where the labels go, you have to have a global view of what's in the graphic. Because, for example, in this case, one is not worried, I think, about what happens if one of these points is bigger. How do I make one of those points bigger? Can I do?
So plot style goes to absolute point size of 10.
No, that's not what I want. I want them different sizes, for example. I mean, can I do that? I can
make it absolute point size of I when you generate the table, right?
Well, no, but that's not.
That's not right, because that won't do it for this case.
Right. I mean, Stephen, can you open the documentation for bubble chart? And scroll down. There should be some labeling. Examples, not notes. Scope, labeling and legending. Those are all boring. Those are all looking boring.
There's more interesting. Wow, what's that doing?
So that is from an option that we have that controls what the maximum size of a label is. If you look at the one below it, then
yeah. Hey, by the way, sorry. This is a point. Who's PMing here? Do we have some project manager here?
Chapin. I'm right here.
Okay. Is Sushma here also?
Yeah, and I was called in too.
Okay. So Sushma, can you make a note that in the discussion about held expression manipulation, that we should discuss the with x equals x idiom in connection with that?
Yeah.
It's a okay.
Right. So the next one has, shows the full labels.
Okay. And what happened? Oh, a labeling size goes to full. I didn't know we had all these mechanisms. Okay. All right. But if I were to try and do that, this is labeling. So it's making a choice of whether it's using a call out or a write it on top type label. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is that a labeled thing there, or is labeled?
I mean, so these are all call outs with an automatic position.
Okay.
And it's also determining whether to use.
All right. So look, the basic bottom line is it's pretty complicated. And if you, in general, I mean, if I were to make a bubble chart, okay, so obviously I need to try this. So if I were to say here, I were to make a bubble chart and I were to put, hold on, just an abstract bubble chart here, but I were to say labeled in that bubble chart, right? So, so let's say here I say bubble chart, and each one is, all right.
The random triple.
Well, I was thinking it's got that coordinate. How does this work? Is that the coordinate and then the size? Is that correct?
Right. And then a label.
And then a label. Okay, so then let's say I put an I there for a label. Okay.
Right, and all those labels are small and they all fit inside the disks.
Okay. Okay, so let's go. Well, fair enough. Kind of beautiful, but irrelevant.
Switch to random word.
I've already got an issue there. Okay, so you choose to do that. Are you in fact getting all the digits here? Or did you there?
I don't think it is. I think it looks like it's clipping because I think the text is centered.
Okay, so that's a little bit embarrassing.
Right.
Okay, so you're just putting for labeled, you're just putting everything on top here.
Right. Right. I mean, in bubble charts, I think had support for labeled from the start. And then call out came later.
Okay, so if I were to do, all right, but my main point here is, so in this case, if I were to say call out here, okay, beautiful. Why does it do that? That seems kind of crazy.
Why does it do what?
That? Why does it put some of them inside?
Because if they fit, and they,
But I
and
asked
they
for
aren't
a
being
call-out.
obscured by anything, then it's, sort of guaranteed space that they're not going to interfere with anything else.
But I mean, I asked for a call-out here.
Mhm.
That doesn't look like a call-out to me.
Call out is very general.
Okay. All right. It's a little odd looking, this. I mean, is there a way I can say make them always exterior call-outs?
Not
You
correct.
set appearance, the appearance option to call out.
Okay.
It might do it.
Somebody was saying, no, it's not possible.
Right, I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, okay, I don't think I wanted to contradict men. So.
Okay.
But no, let's try it. So as an option to call out, do appearance goes to and see whatever the completions are. Say leader. That's still that. Okay.
I think it's a bit unconvincing. I think there's a little bit of a bug here. But okay, the main point is there are complicated algorithms to determine what goes where.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, if we're going to implement these for graphics, how does that work? Does graphics have to simply see that it has one of these things inside and go through an evaluation pass to figure out how to place it? Or do we think it should be done in the front end?
Well, I mean, certainly not all of the options to the viz functions are also options to graphics. So it would be kind of weird.
I understand, but this kind of well, which ones are? What are examples that are not?
Well, like what was that labeling
Plot
side?
style exclusions.
Well, plot style doesn't make a lot of sense for graphics because
Right.
it's not.
I mean, and there's a lot of options. I mean, hopefully, almost all of them are in that category. That.
So this
for
is the
example,
crossover.
a better example, perhaps, and touching back on what we discussed, we're looking at earlier, is like the plot legends option, which is supported by viz functions but not graphics.
Okay. Hey, why didn't this work? The leader thing. I mean, why does it? It's just overriding that and deciding that it knows best here.
So putting the labels inside the bubbles will save up the space for other labels. So if there is a complicated bubble chart, that will save up the space. Yes.
I mean, I would still expect it to override.
Yeah, I think this is a bug. I think if you explicitly say, give an appearance option, it should do that. Now and I don't know what call out is documented to do.
The default is automatic
for what the appearance is, but none of those appearances represent. I mean, if I say balloon here, I mean, none of those appearances say put it inside the object.
Right. The position was decided first, and then the appearance was on top of that.
Right. I mean, it's basically switching between leader and none.
Okay.
And it's also changing the position.
But so if you say appearance arrow none, then what does it do?
It looks like a label.
Okay. I mean, this is really confusing because this said I want balloons, but that isn't a balloon.
Big round thing isn't a balloon?
Yeah. Right. Okay, but so right. I mean I think this is not right, but that's not really the subject of the discussion here.
Correct. I mean, so I mean, I'm not sure what the solution is, or that it's even necessarily a single-pronged thing. Right. I mean, so if we...
To me, there are two possible solutions. One solution is that graphics, when it contains callout and labeled, does an evaluation pass and produces something where those are resolved before it passes it to the front end. Or thing number two, we have these capabilities in the front end. Right? So there are actually a number of interesting comments on the live stream here, which I want to look at. So one person is commenting that full graphics has been broken since version 6. Gosh, that's so.
Oh, it's probably been broken since longer than that.
That's so Well, what is? I don't even know. Do we even document full graphics anymore?
I think we still document full graphics, but not full options.
My gosh. Well, that's pretty embarrassing. What happened here? So, do we think this should work, and what is the story here? What was the point of full graphics?
Well, I mean, the most ordinary case I was aware of was to get axes and frames to be explicitly in the graphics so that you could manipulate them in some way, typically, that was maybe less convenient using options.
I see what you're saying. So, in other words, to actually resolve out, but how does that relate to absolute options and so on?
It doesn't. Not for this sort of thing. Absolute options, which is not working like it should, but even if it was working like it should, it wouldn't do that. It would, absolute options would turn automatic into explicit values, but it would still be the actual values of the options, not the equivalent graphics primitives.
I understand. So that what that's doing is it's resolving what the effective, I'm sure it was ticks arrow automatic as the default, but this is resolving what that means if you were to specify it precisely.
Yeah.
As opposed to make this into a bunch of line segments.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, so what we're talking about is an automatic full. Well, first of all, the fact that full graphics doesn't work is kind of embarrassing. But the first question.
My guess is that something happened when we walked away from the PostScript generation and the kernel rendering of the graphics. I don't know for sure, but that's my guess.
But this is outrageous that there weren't any tests that picked this up and so on. I mean, I'd completely forgotten about this function. Well, as we mention it, I remember it, but it's wow, that's really right. Okay. Somebody is typing. What should we do with full graphics? How difficult would it be to make it work properly? Brett, I think it's a Brett question more than anything.
No,
it's actually, I think, related to work that Aaron was doing for cloud.
It is a front end question because the front end is the sole arbiter these days of these kinds of renderings. And we do have in the front end, we do have this, convert to input form thing, which might be co-opted to do something along these lines.
Okay,
is that the JSON graphics thing, or is that something?
It's related. It actually predates the JSON graphics by a considerable degree, but it's using many of the same mechanisms, but in this case, emitting Wolfram Language input form rather than JSON.
So how would I get that? What do I do there?
So
I can go convert to input form here.
So I think if you just select a cell with a graphic and convert to, I'm not for sure if that will work or not. If it doesn't, I can give you an example that will.
I mean, that's not going to change the axes and stuff.
Yeah, that's not resolving the axes.
Okay.
Okay, but so that's another thing we got to figure out is full graphics and what to do.
And it's a related thing, So if it isn't handled by the front end, labeled and call out and whatever, then in order to support, the full range of primitives, so weird disk specs and various splines and whatever else, then you need some way of getting position information about those objects.
Right.
And so, I mean, if you want it fully general, it either has to be in the front end or.
But you're saying if you want it to be able to deal with different sizing of fonts and all that kind of stuff, then that is only known at rendering time. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, fonts and how big a disk is and that sort of thing.
Okay, let me ask a question for you, Brett. How complicated is all this code that determines the placement of labels and so on? Is it a big hairy mess, or is it fairly clean? What is it? Is it Wolfram Language code?
It is Wolfram Language code, and
is it conceivable?
It is complicated.
Okay, is it conceivable it's compilable by the compiler?
No, not anytime soon.
Okay.
I mean, portions of it might be.
So the only realistic way that code would be usable in the front end is with a callback.
Right.
Okay, which is effectively equivalent to doing a pre-processing pass on the graphics. The only question is what we would store. So right now in graphics, we're storing that cache, right? Remember what we have? I mean, like if I do this plot here, and I will not the input from. Could whoever's typing in not on mute, please mute themselves or something. If I look at the at this, right? What is this cache here? What is that thing?
That's not a cache. That's the line.
It's a packed array.
Yeah, that's a packed array.
Okay.
Stored as compressed data.
Okay. All right. So then my question would be, what about the following possibility that we actually pre-process the graphics in the kernel and then send along to the front end the something which contains caching data that has the information about how to place these things, rather than modifying the actual graphics object, which I don't think is a good idea. I think the graphics object has to, continue to be inert, right?
I mean, I guess there's a question of can we actually compute this without leaking side effects, which would still be a problem for people who actually manipulate graphics.
Okay, well, that's a different issue, but I don't think most of the stuff has. Okay, if there is a side effect associated with the computation of a label, well, I don't think that's an issue, but maybe I'm wrong. But let's
right. I mean, so the algorithm does some amount of.
Yeah, but I'm trying to get an understanding of the structural issue. If graphics is basically generating caching data that it can send to the front end. It does not affect, when you type graphics in the kernel, that graphics object, as far as the visible thing is concerned, will be completely inert. However, the kernel will be generating a hidden cache that it can send to the front end that specifies the placement of those things, so that we're not recomputing or computing, having to compute in the front end all of this placement information. John Fultz, can you comment on that?
Sorry, I was still looking at the input form thing, which I'm very close to having, by the way. It looks like we do have the ability to really literalize axes and such.
Okay, so fine. So then we can re-implement it. So then that can be put into full graphics and we can fix that bug.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for my distraction.
Okay. So now can you pay attention to this, please? So what I'm proposing is that what we do is that graphics in the kernel, that graphics appears to be inert, but generates caching information that allows the front end to that has generated the placement information or the kind of the generated graphics primitives to do all of these various callouts and things. Your comments on that?
I don't know enough about what's actually being done by the visualization team.
Right. I mean, so for the visualization, current placement stuff, Right. I mean, it's very specific to points, lines, starting to get into polygons and surfaces. But it's not necessarily general purpose, and it's not necessarily the case that if you have, that it's set up for labeling a mixture of things.
Okay, fine. So there's two different issues here. Look, engineering-wise, this is not going to go in the front end anytime soon. Right? It's just too complicated. We don't want it there. Therefore, we have to have some kind of, caching, transport cache, so to speak. That's thing number one. Thing number two, you're saying, and there is more development work to do if we want to fully support an arbitrary mixture of graphics primitives with arbitrary labels and callouts. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, fine. But we can get somewhere, we can do the obvious thing easily, but then we have to build a framework that involves this transport cache to be able to let these things be computed in the kernel and then sent to the front end. Fair?
Well, I wonder if, either full graphics or maybe some other function, right? So we can have like a literalized graphics types function, which goes and searches for things which require and sort of invokes all of the visualization logic to stick them,
Sure, but we don't want that at a user level. At a user level, the person should just use labeled in a graphics. We're not going to have a big, long discussion about whether they know whether the thing is happening in the kernel or the front end. It's irrelevant because in a theoretically, conceptually, all this stuff like axes is resolved in the, should be thought of as conceptually resolved in the rendering stage. Right? We're not going to have
I don't think. I don't think that's necessarily true. People rely on the graphics language to represent, the graphics, and if we're going to sort of suddenly transform it into something else,
okay,
right? One of the complaints about geographics is that you can't really apply the sort of, you can't do the same sort of processing on it that you can on graphics.
Like what?
Right, you can't just sort of insert points or sort of manipulate entities, right? Because it has the.
What do you mean? You can't. It has geographics has its own interpretation of what point and polygon and so on mean in the context of geo coordinates and so on.
Right, and you can't really manipulate that.
Well, what do you mean by manipulate?
You have to rely on sort of.
Well, what kind of manipulation are we talking about? You're talking about taking the symbolic expression and doing something to it, right?
Right.
Okay, well, you can do that. It's just that. Are you saying that geographics actually evaluates to something different?
Yes.
Geographics actually evaluates.
I see.
Which is
maybe
perhaps why it shouldn't have been called geographics. But
well, okay, but let's. So if I say something like this, well, actually, I'm going to say point of that, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say something like polygon of what on earth is it doing? What is it doing? Oh, there we go. Okay. So, and you're saying if I now look at the input form of that it's going to be some huge. What the heck is it? What's it doing here?
It's got a huge bitmap in it.
Wow. Okay.
Right, but it's it's geographics of graphics.
Well, excuse me. What on earth is this? An input form. Why is this numeric array not showing up as a compressed data object?
It's input form doesn't do that.
Right.
Never has.
Right. If you had unformatted the cell, you would see compressed data, but you asked for the input form.
Okay. All right. Okay. So geographics is an example of exactly this thing, where it is doing, in this case, it's doing evaluation as opposed to a caching thing.
Right.
Okay. Which I'm not advocating for graphics. I'm advocating invisible caching. I'm not advocating evaluation. It's okay. So, yeah, a comment on our live stream from Lucas is, with the hidden cache thing, it'll be hard to manipulate the rendered callouts. Although if full graphics is fixed, that would be a way to do it. I agree. And Brian on our live stream, by the way, agrees with many of us that if you say, I want leaders on my callouts, you should get leaders on the callouts. Okay. Well, look, I think that, okay, so I think we can more or less wrap this up, because I think what we want to do is study the possibility of a transport cache and study what it would take to generalize the labeling and call out stuff to deal with arbitrary collections of graphics primitives. Is that fair?
That's for Brett, so I'm okay.
I mean,
it's not all for Brett. I mean, part of this is for John, because it has to do with how we would do this transport cache. And by the way, if we did the transport cache approach, then we'll immediately get the cloud version working too. John, can you comment on that?
I don't properly understand what a transport cache here is.
So what I mean by that is, you type graphics, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The kernel will do an evaluation pass on that.
Mm-hmm.
It will, and I don't know exactly the right way to do it. I mean, there are a variety of functions that have caches, like rule, for example, has caches that are not visible. So if I type, I'm sorry?
No, that rule does not. But it hasn't for several versions.
How does that work now? Is it a weak hash table or something? What is it? How does it work?
I guess if you actually use it in a replacement, then yes, it'll be a weak hash table.
Okay, fine. So it's a disconnected cache in that case. So my point is to have an invisible cache that is transportable to the front end. It doesn't necessarily have to be invisible. I mean, it could be added as an option in the graphics, right? That then is transported to the front end. The front end uses that to effectively add in additional primitives that correspond to that, the labeling stuff.
Okay. Well, it depends on the complexity of what we're doing around that. But I mean, in principle, yes, the sort of thing you're talking about is not unreasonable.
I mean, I think it might, some things that I worry about are things like selection working correctly in the graphic, although frankly, that's not widely used. But I mean, I think that will be a question of just exactly how that cache looks and how it encapsulates different.
Well, yeah, I mean,
how does selection work for something like this, by the way? Does selection work in a reasonable way here? I mean, if I go...
I mean, probably not, because there's dynamics involved.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that one's probably fine.
That's kind of interesting. I'm amazed that works. Wow.
It's probably partially luck.
That's encouraging. That's really cool that works. I mean, it would be nice if that worked. And in fact, this relates to, I don't know what is going on with the, okay, that's okay. So, it does what it does. Not unreasonable. So that selection was okay. Now this selection, what happens if I try and do this selection here?
Those are dynamics. And so they're going to reset themselves, if you manage to move them.
Okay. Even if I move the center, it just beeps at me.
Okay.
What does it say about why it's beeping? Okay.
I don't remember setting them not editable, but
it may have been a base style of something that you used.
I don't think people expect this to work, although it's another thing that we should put on the list as a possible, as something possible. But okay, so anyway, my recommendation is this transport cache idea, and
so then the potential consequence of this would be that graphics of something involving labeled may take 3 seconds.
That's correct. I mean, but it's got to be computed somewhere, right?
Right.
So the alternative is it fails and does nothing and produces a pink box, which I don't think is particularly useful. People may be surprised if they have some very complicated graphic with 10,000 points in it, and they all have labels, and they've all got to compute their avoidance algorithm, they may be surprised that's slow, but then they'll get a beautiful graphic out, and maybe they'll figure out why it was slow. In a perfect world, as we're going towards more kind of immediate feedback, having something where you have a little slider that says computing, labeling, what are these progress indicators that says, computing, labeling or something, would be a lovely thing to do. If indeed you get into that 3-second situation.
Right.
All right. Anything more to say in this meeting?
So coming back to highlighted.
Yes.
Which you had brought up, and you wanted it to sort of puff out.
Well, I don't. Did I want it to puff out? I mean, remind me what highlighted.
If you go back to that other notebook that contains the snippet from your email.
Yes. Where was that? Should highlighted work? Oh, I see what we're saying. So for example, I see what we're saying. So if I say something like, let's see, I want to say, here's what I'm trying to say. So I'm trying to say something like, countries in continental Europe. And then I say something like here. So obviously, if I were to select out of this something like Monaco, right? And I would say, for example, let me do this. Let's. Oops, that's not what I want. I want to take this, and I would say here. I'm trying to think what this is going to do, but let's say I say for Monaco. Where's Monaco? There we go. I say style, red. Okay. And now I say geographics of this.
I don't think it's going to do anything. Well, it's going to show you Europe, but not.
Oh, I should have said style polygon Monaco red.
Right.
Right. Okay. So the problem with that is, okay, wow, this is really slow. Why is it so slow today? It's crazy.
It hasn't woken up yet.
No, something is wrong. There's something wrong, and somebody should try and figure out what it is, because I've had, several things here that were. Okay, so let's prune down our list dramatically. Okay, actually, it doesn't really matter. Actually, all we need to do is that, and then say plot range, geo range, arrow. Okay, so you'll see what the problem is here.
The problem is Monaco is tiny.
Yeah, well, let's see what okay, so we don't see Monaco here, right? So my issue is, if I said highlighted of Monaco, I would like that to work. In other words, what's the mechanism to do, how do I get something where I can see it? Where I can see Monaco here.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what the mechanism is.
Okay, but what I might expect would work is to say highlighted. Right? Instead of saying style red, say highlighted of Monaco. Mm-hmm. In other words, if I say geolist plot, I could do the same thing. I could say geolist plot of, this is probably the better case. I'd say geolist plot of just Monaco. But now if I say here, that's the case that I wanted. I was confused.
I see.
Yeah, I was confused. So this is the case that I want, is style Monaco there, and this, and I'm not going to be able to see it. Right? There it is. I can't see it.
Right.
Right? So what I would like to be able to do is to say highlighted of Monaco and have it be somehow visible. I'm not sure what the right mechanism for making it visible is, but that's the idea.
Right.
Well, is the problem that it's not actually making it red, or that we can't see that it's red?
We can't see it.
If he gets rid of the geo range, then it'll be nice.
No, that'll be absolutely fine. But that's not the point. The point is that there are cases here where you want to be able to see. You say, I didn't know that was its shape. Okay, well there it is.
Right.
Okay.
So right.
But now he doesn't know where it is.
Yes, now I don't know where it is.
Right. So right, but I get the point I'm trying to make is, does it I mean, is this something where you're using the wrong tool and you want to be using,
No,
call-outs?
because no. Let me give you an example.
Right, because I don't see how blowing it up by an arbitrary amount. I mean, I don't see.
No, I don't think blowing it up is sufficient. I think it is going to need to turn into a call out of some kind. Because here's the thing that I did. Okay, so for example, I'm showing a map of what countries have signed the such and such treaty, for instance. Okay, and it looks like, oh, nobody in Europe has signed that treaty. Well, actually, Monaco did, but I can't see that because on the map, maybe China did, and it's a great big blob on the map, but I don't see Monaco on the map. Right, that's the case I'm trying to deal with. And so that is more of an information visualization thing where you might want some little,
the other
flag.
sense of call out, an inset map.
Oh, that's a different thing. I think that's more elaborate. I wasn't thinking of something that elaborate. I mean, I was thinking here. So if I say call out of this, what the heck is that?
Well, you gave it red, and I get so it's trying to type said red. Now I don't know.
That's an interesting failure mode.
Yeah, but right, if you did like foo whatever, right? Yeah.
What did it do?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I think that's a bug, guys.
That's a bug.
I mean, it's definitely a bug. We're just trying to figure out what kind of
Okay,
bug
but
it is.
the basic point is we want a mechanism for let's see. We want a mechanism that allows you to show that there is a thing there, even though it is too small to see, right? And that's what I was imagining highlighted could usefully do. I mean, it's a
right, but I think that the workflow you were suggesting is, I mean, you don't know that you're not going to see Monaco, right? What I think that's really a visualization, right? I think that's really a visualization function. We need to make it smarter, so either by default
okay. So
or with
geo value plot. So let's for example, a geo region value plot.
Mm-hmm.
It is not smart about this. In other words, if let's say we're plotting, countries with GDP per capita that are above this, right? It's just, there's nothing there and wherever. But actually there's Singapore or something is there, but it's too small to see.
Right.
So what do we do with
right?
that?
I mean, actually, I think for excuse me, it's possible that geo list plot is not being clever enough. I mean, so if you, in that, I think it may be hardwiring countries into polygons, whereas cities have the ability to switch from a polygon representation to a point representation based on scale and how close things are and how big they are and that sort of thing.
I see what you're saying. So this could be switching to a point representation of the country, which would then be visible.
Right.
Right, which is what I was trying to say, right? The problem you're describing isn't, I want to highlight this point, is I want to make the visualization function smarter, so it automatically makes small things visible.
Yes, and Brett is saying that that's already been done for cities. That a city would show, like, for example, if I were to, in fact, basically what you're saying is there's maybe a bug, so maybe it's just a bug, because this is a country, right? Are you saying that as a city, are you saying it might work differently? That would be crazy.
Well, no, so if you do geolist plots,
actually, sorry, let me try
Miami and Orlando and Tallahassee.
Okay, let's do this. Miami, Orlando. Those are very close together.
Mm-hmm.
See, I know a tiny bit of geography. And Tallahassee, I can't even spell. Let's try Gainesville. I think I can spell that.
Okay. So you get Florida, and I think those will all be polygons.
Okay, why is this so slow? What is going on here? Is there some issue with the GeoServer? Okay, so those are all polygons, as you said.
Right, and now add San Diego to the list.
Okay. I'm going minimize by typing. What is going on? Something is wrong here. Can we, Sushma, could you get somebody to try and look at this? I don't know what this is. I'm guessing it's a GeoServer problem.
I'm trying the examples at the same time. They are faster for me. I wonder whether it's because of the Zoom session.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, it may be some other issue with my network, in which case it's a problem question for Roger.
Okay.
What the heck is going on?
I was going to say,
here?
that's taken a really long time, even for the other ones we've seen.
What is going on? All right, let's try one more time, and then we'll. Well, okay, but you're telling me that what this is doing is to put points for all those cities.
Correct.
Okay, well, so maybe that's just and why is it choosing to do that and not choosing to do that for countries? Maybe that's just a pure bug.
I think it was, sort of, historical how GeoListPlot was developed, and
all right, so then maybe this is a bug. That basically what we should do is we should say that there's a minimum size where a polygonal thing will get turned into a point.
Mm-hmm.
We must be careful with this because imagine one of these world polygons in which we have like 10,000 islands. If they all get now converted into points, it's not going to look correct.
You're right about that, but if you specifically mention these islands in the GeoListPlot, I mean, in other words, we have a way of we have an explicit way. I don't understand that comment, actually, Jose. I don't understand that. Why are you? Could whoever's typing please mute themselves?
Sorry.
So this is an aliasing, anti-aliasing thing. So when you have very many islands, if they are all points, they look like bigger than they should be. So it's a good thing that the smaller ones are not visible.
Yeah, that's right. But if you explicitly ask for them, I mean, if they're in the base
Yes.
map, so to speak, you don't want them to be explicitly visible. But if you explicitly ask for them, then surely you should be seeing them, right?
Yes. If there are a few, I fully agree. Yes.
I do not know what is going on with my system here. This is really weird. Anybody? I'm just going to try this.
I just evaluated that input. I'm going to send you a screenshot so you can.
Yeah. Okay. What the heck? Well, now it worked. Okay, so I get what's happening here. So I mean, okay, so you're telling me basically that if I did this in Europe, for example,
Not though the color doesn't seem to apply to
I think we only have polygons for U.S. cities at the moment.
No, okay, I understand.
Correct.
I understand. But I'm saying that if I were to combine cities and countries, who is commenting on the color? What's wrong with the color here?
right, that they're all red. So
That's fun. Okay, another bug.
Okay. But okay, so look, it seems to me that the bug is simply if you explicitly mention an object and it is going to be too small to see, you should put a point there. And we may want some control over that. I mean, it is conceivable that even in this case here, that you might want to simply not see these things if they're too small.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we've made the choice to make them into points, which I agree is the typical default that we'd want. But right. Yeah, Brian on our live stream is commenting on actually making inset maps will be really cool for certain cases, or at least having the option to do that. And that
it would be. It's on Jose and my list.
Okay, fine. I don't think it's on a list that I've ever seen. But okay, so look, it seems like we should just investigate this, and there may just be a bug here.
Right. And as you say, you're going to want some control over it because you won't necessarily want to point for Monaco if everything in Europe is lit up already.
Sorry, I didn't understand that comment.
Right. So if you have, a polygon for Italy and a polygon for France and whatever. You may not actually need.
What do you mean? In that case, the problem is, look.
I mean, in that case, a polygon for Monaco may be enough. Instead of having this weird little point floating.
Right, but particularly in geo-region value plot, it's sort of disastrous to have a region you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here if I say style Monaco, or this is not going to work, are you telling me that? Style Monaco green or something, right? Actually, I don't even need to say that. I'm just going to see, what is going on here? What is going on? Oh, whatever. Okay, so no Monaco. We can't see it. Okay.
Right.
So that's what I think is wrong. I think Monaco should be showing up, and I don't know what the right visualization is on this map. I don't think a red dot is the right default, and that's a different thing to talk about in terms of styling.
I mean, probably it would still be a dot, but it would be a yellowy, orangey dot.
I would think so. But I think it's useful in this case. See, it's so difficult to say. You might not want it to show up, or you might want it to show up. In geo-region value plot, you definitely, I think the default, okay, I'm going to make the claim. The default for geo-region value plot is to make it show up. The default in geo-list plot is probably not to make it show up. Anybody want to comment on that?
I think the default is to make it show up in both cases.
Okay. But I think we do need an option to control it so that it's kind of the real size version of the graphic.
Mm-hmm. Right.
As opposed to the kind of InfoVis version of sizing.
Right, and in region value plot, we use tooltips for the value, right?
Yes.
So
but we color things according to the value.
Right. I mean, you get color and you get the tooltip.
Right.
I see.
But you need to be able to see it in order to know that.
Yeah, in order to go over it to see the tooltip.
Exactly, and if the values are not necessarily numeric, then.
Well, that's a completely separate discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. We should wrap this meeting, but okay. So we've got a number of things to follow up on here. All right. Okay. Thanks all very much. Thank you to the folks on the live stream. See you next time. Actually, is there a next time? Is there one later today, or is it? Let me look. No, tomorrow.
Well, and also tomorrow is the first of our version 12 marketing page Twitch sessions. So,
which one is it?
Asymptotics. Me and Devendra will be presenting on asymptotics.
Okay.
So.
And
Brett, and speaking of visualization, Brett will be talking about complex visualization on Thursday. So
complex valued visualization.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
Great. Okay, and tomorrow it looks like we have entity ontology discussion as a live stream. Okay, see you all soon.
See you.
Thanks.
Bye.